Joining me now, Gregory Angelo. He is the executive director of the Log Cabin Republicans. That is the number one gay organization for the Republican Party. They're gay Republicans, and they've been with us a very long time. They're great people. And Gregory, good to have you with us.
I appreciate you and your listeners kind of working through the technical difficulties, and I'm really happy to be back on the show today.
Okay, Gregory Anthony, the executive director of Log Cabin Republicans. So let's talk about the choice of Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Now, the Democrats running around. I was on CNN last night, Gregory, and on the set, I mean, their hair was on fire. Hysteria, delirium, frenzy. Many of them saying on CNN that they were, sitting in there and saying they're going to roll back gay marriage. They're going to eliminate that. They're going to roll back all the gay rights that have been gained, etc. I mean, just absolute craziness. With Judge Kavanaugh, do you fear any of that, any of the accusations?
Not at all. Not in the least. I slept very soundly last night, John, because, in Kavanaugh, you have someone who literally has never issued any sort of opinion either way, either something that one might consider pro-LGBT, like Kennedy's Supreme Court marriage decisions, or something anti-LGBT, something that could harm the LGBT community. There's none of that. What do we have to go on with Kavanaugh? Well, he clerked for Kennedy. He clerked for the justice who has issued the most opinions in support of equality for the LGBT community than any judge in American history ever. So I think that should give us some insight into his personality. I do think it's really interesting that, although certainly not unexpected, that you had every LGBT leftist organization in the United States ready to go and click the send button on their email fundraising blasts, calling Kavanaugh or any of the other justices that were in contention for this nomination an anti-LGBT bigot who would roll back equal rights for not just LGBT Americans, but all Americans. And that's concerning to me. That's the concerning thing to me, is the language and the rhetoric that continues to be ramped up on the left. And it doesn't matter if it's the LGBT left that's stoking the flames here, or people like Senator Jeff Merkley, who on the steps of the Supreme Court last night said that Kavanaugh was going to usher a path to tyranny into the United States. I mean, you were with the CNN folks, but the news today, and I was watching last night from my apartment, Shannon Bream on Fox News was almost violently attacked by the mobs that were out in the Supreme Court, mobs that had already assembled and were going to protest even before they knew who the nominee was. I mean, if that's the way that the left is going to respond to Kavanaugh, Mitch McConnell might as well just call a vote today and get this whole the drama and the formality of it all over with, because Democrats haven't just made up their mind already to oppose this nominee. They made up their minds weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, specifically when Kennedy announced that he'd be stepping down.
I think you're right. And it's been shameful, some of the shenanigans that have gone on. And if you look at Kavanaugh's rulings, I mean, there's nothing to suggest that he's going to overturn any of the gains by the LGBT community that's been made with civil rights at all. None of them. And in fact, I would go a step further and say that Kavanaugh has said on numerous occasions that he believes in what he called the power of precedent. Whether it's Roe v. Wade or gay marriage, I think this has already been settled. I don't see Kavanaugh being someone that's going to agitate to overturn any of this. I don't. And as you pointed out, there's no historical perspective, no historical rulings that he's made that have been anti-gay or anti-gay marriage or anti-LGBT. So I don't even know what they're protesting.
Exactly. And not like, even putting aside the gay stuff and the LGBT stuff, this is something of a milquetoast nominee. He's not as much of a flashpoint that someone like, say, Barrett would be had she been nominated for this position. He doesn't have a litany of controversial decisions, and it's going to be very difficult for these Republican moderate senators like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who up until last night, Democrats had been placing all their hopes on to stop any Trump nominee from going through. think it's also going to be difficult for folks like Democrats like Manchin and Donnelly and Heitkamp not to vote for this nominee. I mean, and that's the thing, too. So when you talk about the protests that you see from the left and the hysterics and the meltdowns, that's really all that they can do at this point. Kavanaugh is all but assured to be confirmed. He's not a controversial nominee as many in the left-wing media and many on the left would have you believe. He's a pretty mellow jurist, and that ultimately, I think, will make it extremely difficult not only for Democratic senators and all Republicans to oppose him, but I think it's also going to shed light for the many Americans who do not consider themselves Democrats or Republicans, who are independent voters, when they see the way that the left tries to dump gasoline on a fire and ratchet up hysteria to the point of the verge of, and in some cases actually implementing violent behavior on the streets. It's going to have an extremely detrimental effect on Democrats' chances of retaking the House later this year, and it's going to have the effect of essentially killing off all chances of them retaking the White House in 2020. So, from my perspective, the Democrats should keep going, because all this, the hysteria, the protests, and the twisting of truths that you get about Kavanaugh, a good man, a solid justice, a principled man, is only ultimately going to serve to bolster Republicans' chances on Election Day in 2018 and 2020.
Gregory T. Angelo, you're so right on this. As you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that the Democrats are just snatching defeat right from the jaws of victory. I mean, if you asked me 2 months ago how many seats they would win in the House in the midterms, I would say 50 to 60, maybe 65. I mean, it was going to be a blue wave like you've never seen. You almost got to get back to Newt Gingrich. And what was that? 94, right? Yeah, you almost got to get back to that. But now they're just, with all the shenanigans they're doing, they're just fumbling it away. By the way, we're with Gregory T. Angelo. He's the executive director of the Log Cabin Republicans in Washington, D.C. That is the oldest and most prestigious gay rights group who are Republicans in the United States. They've been around a very long time. So let me ask you this, Gregory. Will the Log Cabin Republicans take a position on Judge Kavanaugh after you guys have a meeting? How will this work?
I think it behooves our organization right now to kind of be agnostic on Kavanaugh. I mean, we'll see what he says in his hearings. I can tell you this: we're certainly not taking a posture of opposing this nomination. Mm-hmm. I think the man is deserving of a hearing as soon as he's able to sit down and get some one-on-one time with members of the United States Senate. But certainly, again, from my perspective, looking at the prolific history of judgments, let's keep in mind this man, while he hasn't exactly authored a ton of controversial opinions, this is a man who has been a jurist and worked in the legal profession for decades. So there's certainly, this was the one hesitation I heard from a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill about his potential nomination was that there's a massive paper trail when it comes to him. There's a lot for opposition researchers and Democrats who are out for blood to pour over. But nowhere in that litany of decisions and in a career that spans decades do you have any instance where he exhibited anti-gay animus. I think that's something that I think is a positive indicator on his nomination. And as we said with Gorsuch when he was nominated by Trump last year, the man deserves a hearing, and I think that it behooves the members of the United States Senate, Democrat and Republican, to give him that.
Well, let's see what happens when he has it. I mean, I kind of agree with you in the fact that he's got so many writings, so many decisions, so many opinions that he rendered, over 300 of them that, of course, the Democrats' opposition are going to pour through. But we were talking about this earlier, Gregory, and it would have been easier for the president to pick someone else without this kind of a deep record. But I think he's done the opposite. There's an interesting thing about President Trump. He's an anti-elitist, no question about it. I mean, he doesn't like the elites in Washington, and even when he was in New York. So he's an anti-elitist. but he is a credentialist. I'll call him a credentialist because this president is very motivated by your credentials, what you've accomplished, where you went to school, what your grades are. I mean, people that have interviewed with him have been asked that question, like he's asked, GPA averages and things like that. So he believes that success comes from your background, your education, your work ethic, your credentials. And I think, he looked at Kavanaugh, and this guy, I mean, somebody said that this, I think I just said Corey Lewandowski, and I didn't realize this. He's like, the guy has been a Washington, D.C. circuit court judge for a dozen years, right? 12. And he's 52. That means he obtained that judgeship, which is powerful, when he was 40 years old. I mean, Gregory, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny, when you look at I'll call this, and the embarrassment of riches that we have as conservatives when it comes to the potential nominees that Trump has with, this famous list, which, by the way, I would add, I believe is probably likely the most transparent process we've ever had in the history of the United States in the selection and vetting of a Supreme Court justice. But throughout that list are, it's not just Kavanaugh. There are numerous people who are in their 50s, some just in their 40s, who have already established strong constitutional conservative bona fides and the respect of their peers, regardless of whether their peers were nominated by a Democratic president or a Republican president. I think it's really interesting what President Trump is doing, because in addition to credentials and accomplishments, he is looking for the best of the best, the cream of the crop when it comes to the circuit court nominees and the Supreme Court nominees. And I think the large part of the cream of the crop for this president and his advisors is the people who have accomplished the most in the shortest period of time. I mean, you have now, between Gorsuch and now Kavanaugh, assuming that he's going to get confirmed, justices that will be on the court probably close to the end of my life, likely the end of many others, and then lifelong appointments to circuit court positions around the country. I mean, these are, I can't believe we're only a year and a half into Trump's presidency right now, so who knows what his grand legacy is going to be when all is said and done. But certainly, just over the course of the last 18 months,
it's going to be
I think one of his greatest legacies is already cemented in stone, and that is going to be bringing a conservative judiciary, not just to the Supreme Court of the United States, but to courts all across the United States with lifetime appointments of highly qualified individuals.
We've seen by lower court rulings how that matters. We just saw one the other day as far as immigration enforcement is concerned, a lower judge court ruling that the administration's plan of apprehending illegals that come across the border and keeping them with their children in detention until such time as they can get the paperwork evaluated for asylum because they didn't do it the right way and go to the port of entry like you're supposed to. That's the law. The judge struck that down. So now the administration can't even implement their zero tolerance policy. They're handcuffed with that. That's going to end up going to the Supreme Court over time. But you're right. I mean, the president has filled these lower court judgeships at a breathtaking pace. And you're right, 18 months in, it was 8. I mean, if he gets reelected, I mean, he can influence the entire judgeships, top and bottom in the entire United States for decades. So it's going to be interesting. No question about it.
Yeah, and not just influence, because I think actually, I mean, this is, when you have liberals, they want the courts to influence things. I mean, what we're going to have in a post-Trump presidency, in 2025, I believe, is courts throughout the United States and the highest court in the United States, the Supreme Court, that will be dominated by constitutional conservatives, people that look at the original text of the Constitution of the United States, and if it is not enumerated in that original text of the Constitution and its antecedent amendments, these are things that go back to the states to be decided because that's what the Founding Fathers wanted all along. That's it. I mean, I'm not a constitutional lawyer by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not even a lawyer, but and I don't mean to demean people who are, but it's pretty straightforward what it means to be a constitutional conservative and what it means to be an expert in constitutional law. It's all about the text of that original document. And the reason why you're seeing the left melt down into the histrionics and the madness that they have been really over the course of, ever since Election Day 2016, but it's only been amplified ever since. And certainly with this pick of Kavanaugh or anyone who Trump would have nominated or will nominate. You likely have some more nominees to the highest court in the land. But when the left looks at the law and when they look at judges, they see political activists or potential political activists, and they see people who can potentially create law out of whole cloth by twisting themselves into contortions and viewing the Constitution as the, quote, living document. But I think what you're going to get with Trump is a legacy of judges who adhere to constitutionalist conservative principles, and that's something that any conservative or even any libertarian should be celebrating.
You're right. We're out of time. I want to thank Gregory T. Angelo for being with us. He's the executive director of the Log Cabin Republicans. If people want more information, Gregory, where do they go?
Logcabin.org. Check us out on Twitter at LogCabinGOP, Facebook.com/LogCabinGOP.